Support for WPR comes from 4imprint, providers of promotional products for businesses, including embroidered apparel, trade show items, and logoed business gifts. More is at 4imprint.com. 4imprint, for certain.
Thanks for joining us on WPR News. Larry Mealer here. It's another Wildlife Wednesday, and great to have back Scott Craven, Emeritus UW Extension wildlife ecologist. He's back to talk, protecting your gardens from hungry critters. We can talk about seasons, hunting seasons, and other wildlife management issues as well. And I hope you'll join in with your own questions or comments. Maybe share your own outdoor observations or a question about a particular animal or bird. I hope you'll join in. The number to call, 800-642-1234. Or you could send an email to talk@wpr.org. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Larry, and to the listeners. It's always nice to be back on.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. We've got some positive news overall that we can talk about relating to our birds in the state. Turkey hunt, for example, that was a pretty good harvest this year.
It was an excellent turkey season. The weather cooperated, the birds cooperated, and despite a lot of widespread concern, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country, that turkey numbers, after exploding back after reintroduction, had begun to retrench a little bit. And I too was concerned and thought I was seeing that. But then all of a sudden, along came the 2025 turkey season, and it seemed like there were turkeys everywhere. And there were, lots around my house here in southern Dane County, outside Madison, and we were out with the grandkids for the youth hunt, and that went fabulously. We back in April, and then followed up by the 6-week-long hunting periods that ended at the end of May. And we ended up with a turkey harvest that was in the top 5 since turkey hunting started back 40-plus years ago. And it was overall just a great season. So hopefully that portends good things for the future. But for right now, turkeys seem to be back on track.
Yeah.
If they were ever off the track. So it was a very good season. Yes.
And looks like it's going to be a hunting season for sharp-tailed grouse. The first one since 2018. I guess the numbers are up there.
Yep, the DNR recently announced that there would be a hunting season for sharptails this coming fall. It'll run from October 18th to November 9th. And as you mentioned, it's the first time it's been open since 2018. Those birds are closely related and behave a lot like prairie chickens, but in a different environment. And like prairie chickens, they're watched very closely and have an advisory committee that reviews whatever data are available each year and then makes a decision on the hunting season. And the decision this year was that the population was doing reasonably well in response to some cooperative management efforts in their habitat up in northwestern Wisconsin on the Pine Barrens. And as a result, they would open the season. But the important thing for our listeners is, if this is something you think you might want to get in on, or you want to remind somebody else to get in on it, it is an application process for a limited draw to get a permit to hunt these birds, and that's open now until August 1st. So basically open for the month of July. And if you get your application in, it'll be a 1 bird per day bag limit, and it's kind of an opportunity to pursue something that was once more abundant, more popular, but now is considered kind of a trophy. So there you have it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw it, but I got a note this morning from the DNR, a report on both ruffed grouse and pheasants. And I don't know if you saw that, but it looks like pretty positive numbers, at least for the grouse and the pheasants.
Yep, I did see it. And in this morning's news release, they indicated that they felt it was good news all the way around. For the pheasant survey, for example, observations were once again above the 5-year average for pheasants for the second year in a row. But I think that needs to be taken with a a little bit of a grain of salt. We don't have large pheasant numbers, large wild pheasant numbers to begin with. So an increase from 0.6 birds per stop on the survey to 0.8, while it's a positive increase, it doesn't mean huge numbers of pheasants like you might find in Nebraska, the Dakotas, or whatnot if you're out there hunting. The highest abundance is up in the northwestern part of their range in Wisconsin, and lowest abundance in the east central portion of their range. Now, grouse, on the other hand, the drumming survey for this spring was actually down slightly, 6% statewide, which normally would say, oh, this is the start of a decline in the 10-year cycle. But if you recall last year, they were up a whopping 57%, which was almost unheard of.
Yeah.
So 6% down was, they were expecting an even greater decrease from that last boom last year. So the small decrease was quite acceptable, and the bottom line is grouse numbers remain strong. So
yeah,
good news all the way around.
It is indeed. Mike in Minocqua has a question for you. Let's go there. Mike, thank you for calling.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Thanks a lot. We have a cabin in the woods, and we have a deck, and on the light that we have on the deck, we came a couple of days ago and realized there's a nest up there, and the nest has got 3 eggs, robin blue eggs, and there's a robin. She keeps, I assume it's a she keeps coming back and forth to nest on it, and if we go outside, she goes away. I guess what should we be doing, and is there a chance that those eggs won't hatch? At what point are they non-viable? I mean, we call the local, Northland Wood Wildlife Place, and they said sometimes they don't even hatch. Is that true? And should we just keep giving her space?
Well, if she's tending to them and seems tolerant of you, then the odds are pretty good that they'll hatch. Then at that point, you'll have to deal with the fledgling period or nestling period when the young ones are in the nest, and she and perhaps her mate are frantically bringing food back and forth. They're in the nest for a relatively short period of time, and then they'll leave the nest and all's well. At that point, I'd take the nest down and put some type of a cone or screen or whatever else you can devise so that it doesn't happen again next year. But you're kind of committed at this point. If you're willing to be tolerant and the bird's willing to be tolerant, let the situation run its course. She'll produce a brood. They'll be off on their own. She'll be happy. You'll be happy, and away you go. Are you up there all summer?
No, we sort of come and go. Like right now, we got about 10 grandkids up here playing ball in front of the place. So we're trying to tell them to not hit that direction.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's going to be a challenge. But if you're willing to try, and it sounds like you are, do the best you can to give her a chance. And if she pulls off the nest, great. If you get up there and do you know how long she's been incubating on the eggs?
No, I don't. I know it's like I said. I took a picture on earlier this week, and there were 3 nice size eggs. And I know if I walk out the yard or even touch the door, even from inside the house, if I stand up from a chair, she moves. So she's very conscious of who's around. And we've been trying to go out another door and walk around. But anytime we're anywhere near there, she sort of stays in a tree nearby, we have an oak tree and a pine tree on either side, and she flies right up in that. And I have a feeling she's looking at us, waiting for us to leave.
Your feeling is probably spot on, but yeah. There's not much you can do about that other than try and reach some sort of mutual tolerance. And if she eases up a little bit on the panic button and spends a little more time on the nest, I think she'll hatch those eggs, and then, as I said, it'll be over in a few weeks. If you end up there, if it gets to be middle of the month, maybe another 3 or 4 weeks, and there's either no sign of the female or nothing's happened with the eggs, then I think that's going to be an unsuccessful nest, and you can move on. The only thing I can think of with a situation in my cabin is the same right now. There's going to be people all over the place in a few days. if there was a way, I don't know about the architecture there, but if there was a way you could drape a sheet or something opaque between your major exit point or use area and the nest, so that she might not be quite as jumpy, that might help everybody a little bit. But beyond that, I think you don't have any choice. Go about your business. Hopefully the robin will adapt to that, hatch the young, they'll leave, and at that point you move forward with modifying the light so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, there you go, Mike. Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate it. Let's go to Gary in Milwaukee. Gary, hello.
Oh, hello. I have a question about woodcock. I saw it now twice this year, woodcock, during my morning ride through Haven Woods in Milwaukee. Now, that's interesting enough. I love seeing those birds, but the most interesting thing is the male gets up from the side of the path and flies a short distance away, and then lands back on the path and drags his wings like he's wounded, like I would think a killdeer does when they behave the exact same way. And when that happens, the females that he must have been sitting with on the side of the path, in one case it was just one female, in the other case it was three, they take off in the opposite direction. And I'm just wondering if I'm interpreting this right, because it seems so obvious. He drags his wings, and then he kind of goes over to the side of the path and disappears into the bush. And I'm just wondering if he's doing the same thing a killdeer does when it wants you to, leave its babies behind and follow it as if it's wounded.
Well, yeah, I'm going to give you a partial yes and a little bit of an alternative explanation. First of all, that broken wing display or wounded display is not uncommon, especially in ground nesting birds, where they will try and lead usually the female, not the male. The female will attempt to lead any intruders, potential threats or whatever away from the nest to protect whatever's going on at the nest. It's a bit unusual for it to be what makes you think it's the male?
Well, it seems like the male is the male larger than the female, because the ones that take off in the opposite direction, in both cases, well, first of all, this happened both times that I saw. Maybe it was the same woodcock, maybe not. But in both cases, the male took off, the one that appeared wounded took off in one direction, and I'm assuming the ones that he was sitting with took off in the opposite direction. They appeared to be smaller, but they were all.
I think the alternative explanation that I'm going to suggest is that what you're seeing is the female doing the display to get you away, not from a bunch of friends or a male or whatever, but rather the young that have hatched from a nearby nest or somewhere nearby. And the young would be smaller, they would leave, and by this time of year, they should certainly have hatched and been out and about and could be pretty good size at this point. So I think you're seeing the female do what she normally does, and the birds that are scrambling off in the other direction are her brood. The male may be nowhere around.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gary, thank you very much for calling. Scott Craven, our guest today, Emeritus UW Extension Wildlife Ecologist. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Coming up at 12:30, Richard Cates Jr. will join us. He's a cattle farmer in southwest Wisconsin and author of a new book. It's called A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land, A Farm Family's Journey Toward a Land Ethic. That's at 12:30. Right now, Scott Craven talking with us about the world of wildlife. It's always great to have him come by. And you can join in. The number's 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. Scott, we just had a message relating to the Aldo Leopold Foundation, and that reminded me that you've, come across, or maybe you had them all along, some Aldo Leopold scripts, a collection of public radio scripts for broadcast that Aldo Leopold made in 1933.
That's true. I've been trying to purge some of the things I've had in my office for years. I don't know how I came by these over the years. They're photocopies of Leopold scripts, but I assume if there are originals that they're housed at the foundation, as the ad was just describing for the show's support of Leopold's legacy. But anyway, I turned up 8 or 10 of these, and I was looking and said, holy cow, Wisconsin WHA Public Radio Talk, the one that's sitting in front of me, December 14th, 1933. This was, well, not only was it nearly a century ago, but it was the same year that Leopold published his classic book, Game Management, which is kind of it's certainly evolved over time, but at the time it was the Bible for game management. And, this predates Sand County Almanac by 15 years, and yet he ends actually this script that I'm looking at with a statement that I think evolved into one of his most famous quotes. But anyway, I just found them pretty interesting, and as I was reading them, I realized, holy cow, they're written 100 years ago, and as with many things Leopold did, his words have stood the test of time, and his advice is just as appropriate today as it was a century ago, even though some of our thinking has evolved a bit, armed with more information to modify a few things he may have been recommending. But anyway, I did find them interesting.
Would you read a bit of one?
I sure would. The one I selected first was entitled The Farm Woodlot and the Bird Crop. And it's identified as Aldo Leopold, game manager in the College of Agriculture at UW. So after we go through this, it'll be interesting to see if the listeners pick up on anything they want to talk about, or if you want to offer some thoughts, Larry. But I flagged a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning because of the change that's gone on over. Anyway, let me give it a try and see what happens. So this one begins. The era of the Wisconsin lumberjack ended in the gay 90s. In those days, Paul Bunyan was our most powerful citizen. But when the pineries gave out, he harnessed up Babe, his blue ox, and moved west. Wisconsin has not seen him since, except for the forest fires, which still run on his old slashings. Now, of course, that's long since over. There may be nobody left to compare with Paul as a destroyer of Wisconsin timber. Any such notion, however, is mistaken. Paul has a successor at large in the woods who works with less noise and bluster, but is still effective. In the old days, when Paul cut a piece of timber, he moved elsewhere and let it grow again. His successor, however, camps on the stump lot day in and day out, nipping off each sprout or seedling that shows its head. Soon every root and branch is thoroughly and completely dead. The only difference is that the modern Paul has no axe. He can't cut his own tree. He just patrols every stump the farmer has cut and makes sure it never grows again. In the long run, he could turn southern Wisconsin into a prairie. I'll say something about that later. I say he, but this is really misleading. The modern Paul, strange as it may seem, is a lady lumberjack. Who is she? She's the Wisconsin dairy cow. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not defaming the Wisconsin cow, nor do I begrudge her the privilege of grazing in woodlots. I'm pointing out that if we want any woods in the Wisconsin dairy farm landscape of 1950, of course that's long come and gone, particularly woods with enough undergrowth to harbor birds, then the cow must not be allowed access to all of the woodlots all of the time. As a matter of fact, a happy balance between cows and trees is not such a difficult matter. On dry, rocky, or steep hillsides, particularly those with a south slope, the grass dries out early and hence is of little value for crops. Such south slopes, on the other hand, are the natural places for winter cover for birds. If you can fence them off, the cover will grow up of its own accord. As far as birds are concerned, you need not hesitate to cut. The sprout and seedling growth which springs up on ungrazed cuttings harbors more birds than virgin timber, particularly during the early stages when the sprouts retain their leaves in winter. It, of course, goes without saying that the woods must not be burned. Leave even the brush piles if you want birds and rabbits. That's worthy of a comment later, too. A few other points about handling the woods with an eye to the bird crop. Don't cull out the white oaks and hickories and let the black and red oaks take all the ground. The former excel both as timber, as cover, and as food for wildlife. Don't cull out all the hollow snags if you want fur bearers, squirrels, woodpeckers, and other snag nesting species. And lastly, if you value wildlife, divest yourself of the notion that all brush species are useless simply because they yield no saw logs. The wild plum, the thornapple, the bittersweet, the serviceberry, the nannyberry, the dogwood, wild cherry, wild grape, each in its season provides a feast for the eye, a feast for the birds, and the most valuable of bird cover. To sum up, your woodlot is in fact an historical document which faithfully records your personal philosophy. Let it tell a story of tolerance toward living things and of skill in the greatest of all arts, how to use the earth without making it ugly. And it's that latter comment that I think actually evolved into one of his most famous quotes from the Sand County Almanac, which goes something like, the greatest challenge facing mankind or a human is to live on a piece of land without destroying it. So anyway, that's the way that one read. And again, it's kind of interesting to hear those words after nearly a century and realize that some of the thoughts he was offering up on public radio 95 years ago actually were incorporated into some of his other works and ultimately into Sand County Almanac, which still survives and thrives today. So there you have it.
It's pretty cool. You know, and we'll be talking with Richard Cates, Jr. about his book, A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land. And one of the things he talks about is the need to not be grazing cattle in woodlots. He mentioned some other things that really go along with Leopold's own thoughts on the matter. So that's pretty cool. And he is Richard also is reestablishing a prairie area on his farm as well. So that's pretty cool.
Well, it's interesting to think that this was written back with virtually no profession yet backing up the things Leopold was doing and thinking about wildlife, which is why he's really credited with being the father of the profession. And this was in the days when the profession was first developing. So, things like concepts like endangered species and non-game wildlife had not even emerged as such. So that when Leopold was talking about these things, the emphasis was on game species, grouse, pheasants, quail, things like that. And everybody realizes how much broader that approach has become than what it was in those days. So anyhow.
Anyway, well, maybe some listeners have comments. If you have a comment on that or anything else relating to wildlife, I hope you'll join in. The number to call is 800-642-1234, 1-800-642-1234, or you can send an email to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Peg in Dodgeville emailed to say that a groundhog that lives under their shed had babies this year, 6 or 7 of them, and there's 4 that they've seen since. Peg wonders when the young ones can be expected to move on to find their own territory. The garden's pretty well protected for now, and they're welcome to eat all the clover and dandelions they want now. But Peg's a little concerned about having a whole colony of groundhogs around permanently.
and justifiably so. That would be my nightmare around the house here. Having had a lot of experience with woodchucks back in the old days when I lived in New Hampshire, and they were all over the place. But, the young ones should start to disperse here within the next month or so by the latter part of summer. How far they'll go, however, if she's as tolerant as she suspects, which I applaud her for, they may find they don't need to go too far to establish a home base of their own. I guess if it were me, I'd keep a close eye on the situation. see when they do disperse, and if they seem to leave the area, then that's fine. But toward late summer, I'd be working hard to attempt to exclude the parent woodchucks from that hole under the shed, and make sure that that's taken care of in terms of not allowing it as a future den site. A lot of woodchucks are just not consistent with home gardening and landscaping. So if things are still going well, hey, great. They're kind of fun to watch and see them climb a tree and whatnot. But boy, a woodchuck in the garden is a gardener's worst nightmare.
It is indeed. You can join in again. The number to call 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. Somebody else is wondering about garden fencing that may be effective in keeping out rabbits as well as woodchuck and deer. How high does a fence need to be, and so forth?
Well, fencing, a good fence, it's just like the old expression, good fence makes good neighbors. And that holds true for actual neighbors as well as wildlife neighbors. So starting with rabbits, they're the relatively easiest to fence out, but the fence needs to be tight to the ground, or better yet, even underground, first couple inches, with a fairly small mesh size. And with a rabbit, it only needs to be about 24 inches high, so you could actually step over it. But I'm subscribed to the idea that if you're going to build a good solid fence, good posts and so forth, you might as well make one that will take care of all of the potential problems. And that means something higher. At least I use a 4-foot fence with not small enough mesh. The young rabbits can go through it. I need to screen the bottom foot or two with fine mesh chicken wire to solve that problem. But I was also trying to solve the deer incursion problem, which I have. Woodchucks are a little trickier because they're reasonable climbers and can dig under a fence with pretty relative ease. So in the case of the woodchucks, the fence should be, if you're starting from scratch, trench the fence into the ground and flange it out on the side facing away from the garden or away from the shed if you're trying to discourage a woodchuck den like the previous caller. So put about a 4-inch flange on there so that any animal burrowing down to presumably go under the fence is going to hit that lip and be deterred. Then it's a matter of dealing with an appropriate mesh size for the animals you're working against, and the fence is the number one line of defense for wildlife problems in the garden. Plus, in the case of my fencing, it doubles as a trellis for my gourds, my edible pod peas, and a number of other things that grow well on the fence. And it keeps the kids out. It keeps the dogs out. It's a great thing, Larry. You just can't beat a good fence. But anyway, that's maybe a little overemphasis. But the point is, a fence is really a good line of defense. No pun intended.
Tim Isley, an outdoor writer, occasional guest on the show, emailed to say he thinks if Leopold had written what Scott read today, the animal he would have been referring to was not so much a cow, but the white-tailed deer. The deer are having an impact on the sprouting trees, especially oak. Tim said and he mentions it's great that you have those scripts. More people need to read Leopold today.
Well, I mean, and Tim's absolutely right. There weren't as many deer in Leopold's day, and there certainly weren't a lot of deer in southern Wisconsin where he was writing from. So that probably wasn't even on the radar screen. But today, I think there's been a great deal of sensitivity evolved over the years in terms of handling cattle grazing in woodlots and how to deal with that. And people are actually wringing their hands more because of browsing pressure from deer, which is much more challenging to deal with. So Tim's right, and in that case, you can't just say, "Well, we'll move the deer over to the northwest pasture this time around." The deer go where they want to go, and I think they have a great deal more impact on the forest understory in terms of wildflowers, trilliums, and things like that, as well as tree regeneration among oaks and other valuable trees that a woodlot owner might be interested in fostering, but can't because of browsing pressure.
Yeah. Alan in Superior called, couldn't stay with us, but wants to know, ask if the state budget signed by the governor yesterday included anything about non-lethal wolf hunting.
I do not know. So we're going to have to this is a case where we ask the audience, someone familiar with
the bill,
what was in the budget bill and what was signed and so forth, would have to respond to that for us. And I suspect that if we've got a DNR staff member listening, we'll get an answer. I don't know.
Yep.
I didn't even know that. I've been kind of living in a box for the last while, ferrying back and forth between the cabin way up in the North Woods and down here to try and fight back the rabbits, deer, woodchucks, and other things that keep my garden alive. And as soon as this program's over, I'm heading back to Price County. So I didn't even know the budget bill was in effect. I've been hearing a lot more about the big, beautiful bill than what's going on in the state. So.
Well, skunks and raccoons we haven't mentioned yet. And before we take some calls, skunks and raccoons, they dig holes in yards. They're not fun if you've got one digging in your lawn area, for example. And typically that's because of grubs, I think.
Yeah, raccoons and skunks will both dig up lawn grubs, and coons are big enough and strong enough, especially if it's new sod, to roll the turf back and then look for grubs. So that can be a big time problem for someone who's having it. Personally, I blame raccoons for just about everything, ranging from bad TV reception to lawn and garden problems. My personal battle has been with raccoons destroying the bird feeding station. And, of course, the next thing that'll come along is somebody's got a small bit of sweet corn in their garden. The raccoons somehow monitor its ripeness and know the night before you're planning on picking it, and it gets destroyed. So there are a lot of, not to mention the fact that they're a major problem for, turkey poults and young game birds and nests in particular as egg predators. So there are a lot of reasons why you might want to try and manage the coons as best you can, but they're smart, they're very agile, and tough to deal with.
Would a motion-triggered sprinkler system do any help to scare them off?
It might. The motion sensing capability, or things like a ring camera that's what I use to notify me that the coon's here at the feeder, and then I take a more direct approach to preventing another visit. But anyway, that's another matter. I'm not sure the sprinkler would be very effective, but I've also heard them activate, say, a radio turned on to something obnoxious that is more likely to frighten them than the sprinkler. Being for a raccoon to get wet in a rain shower or whatever doesn't seem like a major event in their life. So I'm not sure the sprinkler would be all that effective.
Steve's on the road north from Wapah. And Steve, what's on your mind?
Our cabin up north has had an issue with geese. We're on a lake, and we're part of a condo association, and we've used fencing, 18-inch high green plastic fencing, fairly effectively. And this year, people decided that they did not like the look of a fence, and they wanted to use decoys. And we have two, I guess they're coyotes or whatever they are. And to that, I added some spinners. And I basically watched the geese walk right through them. Does your guest have any good suggestions on other alternatives rather than fence? One of our association members doesn't like the look of a fence. And yes, it's the green plastic, like sort of snow fence stuff. Any ideas?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, as far as the fence is concerned, it can be effective to exclude the geese. They like to walk out of the water on a gradual shoreline to get up to, I assume you're maintaining some turf or grass areas where they like to sit, they like to graze on the grass, and that accumulates all sorts of goose droppings, and that's where your problem comes in. So the fence can be effective, and I guess this comes down to what the person who is objecting likes the least. Is it the grass being heavily grazed and covered with goose poop, or is it I find that fence kind of visually obtrusive? Personally, I think it's easier to get used to the fence than it is to the mess and the grazing the geese can cause. That's just my opinion. If someone feels differently, then you sort of have to deal with that. The coyote decoys, spinners, and other types of visual or even noisemakers, the geese will habituate to very quickly, and they'll ignore them because they're static. Now, if the coyote decoy was on some sort of a little trolley device with a motion sensor, so all of a sudden the geese show up, they're sensed, and the coyote all of a sudden zips down the trolley, that might make a difference. But any type of static deterrent is going to fail sooner or later. There are some other alternatives. There are some repellents that can be sprayed on the turf that will deter their grazing. Some people use trained dogs. There's a publication from Cornell called Suburban Goose Management, which, if you could find a copy of that online, has quite a litany of tools of the trade and their efficacy. But it's not an easy problem to deal with.
I had my lake home on Lake Monona. I had boulders essentially along the shoreline, and the next door neighbor had a gradual incline, had kind of a beach type of situation. And there were days I'd come home and there'd be 20 geese on his property and none on mine.
Well, there's, as I say, the worst case scenario is a gradual slope that the geese can just swim up and leisurely stroll out onto, preferably turf or low grass. A vegetative barrier is also sometimes effective in place of the fence. So if they would find a dense planting of either some shoreline grass or a tall grass or even a flower garden, that would be better than just the open slope.
Yeah.
But it takes a while to establish that, and don't plant something the geese would like for dinner. So, but that publication is very useful. Some of the extension, I'd Google goose management or suburban goose management and see if you can come up with that list.
Here you go, Steve. Thank you. So I turn to another Steve from La Crosse this time. Hi, Steve.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. Appreciate the call.
My question is twofold. I'm assuming it's a groundhog that burrowed under my pole barn door. My floor on my pole barn is gravel. It found a pallet which I had a bunch of fertilizer and stuff on, and it started to burrow. Absolutely cannot believe how much ground this thing moved. But I'd like to, know, do you think that, how can I possibly tell if it's got a brood in there? And then two, I'd like to live trap it and move it. Can you give me any suggestions what to put in a live trap to attract them?
Well, first of all, a couple of comments. The amount of soil moved can be very impressive because the animal's burrow could be 10, 15, 20 feet long. It's not just a shallow hole that they're sitting in. They can create and excavate quite an underground structure. If there's an obvious access point under your door, then that's the choice for where your live trap is going to go. And as far as baiting it, you can't beat fresh vegetables, fresh greens. Fresh green beans would be great. Lettuce and some leafy greens would be fine, but they don't hold up worth a darn in the trap in this kind of heat. So something that's got a little durability, like green beans, like some very small tender zucchini, something like that would be the best choice. But some type of vegetable material. Make sure you have a substantial trap that's pretty solid, because an adult can be a fairly powerful animal. And then if you get it, make sure you take it a substantial distance away and release it somewhere where you have permission to do so. So I guess that takes care of the live trapping. As far as whether they're young in there or not, really no way to tell unless you start to see them out and around. It could just be an individual. You'll have to let your conscience be your guide about whether you want to start trapping and potentially remove the adult. I guess I would, if you do trap an animal that appears to be an adult female and it's obviously lactating, for example, then you got another decision to make whether, all right, I'm going to let her go until those young ones are raised. But this really is something for you to grapple with personally. You know, how concerned are you about that? If the real issue is, I want that woodchuck out and I want it out now, then I'd go ahead and set the trap and deal with you deal with the consequences. Do you see the animal occasionally?
Haven't for a while. That's the part I'm concerned if it had a brood or not.
Well, I mean, that's certainly possible, but again, much like the woodcock we were talking about before, you know, most of these animals that have gone through the spring breeding season from March to May, young of all species should be out and about pretty soon. So if you're willing to tolerate it for another couple of weeks, you see no sign of young. Another way there's a couple of ways you can secure information on that. Number one, if you have a trail camera, a motion sensitive camera like everybody's using for deer scouting and whatnot, you can collect a lot of information by setting a trail camera so that it's set on the burrow entrance, and you'll know soon enough whether they're young coming and going. The low-tech approach to that is, if you know where the burrow entrance is, then spread some talcum powder or even flour, or if it's sand, rake up the sand clean and just watch for tracks. And you'll clearly see the difference between the little guys and mom. So those are two ways to determine whether they're in there or not. And then you have another decision to make. Do you want to be live trapping or catching 5 or 6 or 7 of these things, or do you want to get rid of the big one now and then see what happens?
Yeah.
That's up to you.
Steve, thank you very much for calling. Scott Craven, our guest today, Emeritus UW Extension Wildlife Ecologist. I'm Larry Mealer. Tomorrow on the show, we'll talk to Jessica Harris about her new cookbook, Braided Heritage, Recipes and Stories on the Origin of American Cuisine. And then Ashley Kay talks about traveling the world in a camper trunk. That's tomorrow on the Larry Mealer Show. Right now, Scott Craven talking wildlife. And let's take a call from Mark in Sussex next. Mark, hello.
Hi. Great show as usual.
Thank you.
I have a suggestion for the birds and the bird seed. The raccoons and the squirrels don't seem to like cayenne pepper powder. If you apply a liberal amount of that, it seems to distract them greatly. And if you're not careful, it will distract you also.
Yes, that's a good idea. And if in my case, with the feeders, it was seed that was the issue. Well, it's partially the seed, but the real problem is my suet feeders, and they just tear those up. And I'm not sure if that could be easily treated or not. But there's a commercial. You can fabricate your own effort with ground cayenne or whatever you want to use. There's also a commercial product, or perhaps several of them. One's called Squirrel Scram that the bird feeding stores will happily sell you as a seed additive to discourage mammals from going after the seed. That's a good idea, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it very much. Let's go to Bill in Colfax. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Larry. Thank you very much for taking my call, and thank you, Mr. Cravens, also. My question is, I have a raised garden about 30 inches high. I got about 12 tomato plants and 6 green pepper plants. In the past couple of days, my tomato plants tops, they look like they were all eaten off. And I'm not sure if that's a squirrel or would a deer come by and do that, or that's why I'm calling up. And to find out what it is, what would be a suggestion to prevent them over the summer. Thanks.
So is it just the top of a good sized plant, or was it the whole plant kind of cut off?
It was just the top. Like if the plant was, I'll just say a foot tall, the top 4 or 5 inches of 5 of my 12 plants are eaten off.
Well, I mean, first of all, Bill, there aren't that many things that will eat tomato plants. Of all the garden plants, they're the one that's most impervious to browsing. Now, I had 20 tomato plants in to start the season and lost every one of them in a matter of 3 or 4 days, and the plant was completely gone. I had to do a little digging and research, digging literally, and ended up that cutworms were the problem. But they usually take the whole plant. I've solved that problem with insecticides in the soil. If the top is being nipped off, could deer get to it where it is?
Yes, a deer could get to it where it's at. It's just right on our deck in the back there. So,
well, I guess much like the fences we were talking about on a primary garden, the foolproof issue, until the plant gets up so big that you don't care if there's a little bit of nipping on it, I'd be tempted to, how big's the raised bed? 10 by 10, 6 by 6?
Oh, no. It's like 4 feet by 2 feet. I have 2 of them.
Okay, so I think it would be relatively easy to, in each corner, stick in a driveway marker, the kinds of things that people put out so the snowplows can see where the edge of the driveway is. They're 5 or 6 feet tall, easy to use. Put one in each corner, or maybe the middle, and then work it so that you can drape. You may have to tape or wire a couple of cross pieces on, but drape a piece of plastic bird netting, which is black plastic. Just drape that over there. I say that because it's light, it's inexpensive, and it's easy to use, and nothing will be able to nip the tomato plants off since we don't know for sure what it is. But again, much like the woodchuck problem we just talked about, if you set up a trail camera, if you don't hunt, borrow one from a hunting neighbor and set it up, and you'll see exactly who's nipping off the plants, and then it's a lot easier to tell you what to do. But a simple covering, you could use chicken wire or any type of netting similar to what you'd put on a fruit tree to prevent robins from getting at cherries or whatnot. That'll prevent anything from getting to it. And when you need to harvest something, you just lift it off or roll it back, and away you go.
Yeah.
So that's the foolproof alternative. But to figure out who the culprit is, again, the camera is your best bet.
Yeah. And they're pretty cheap now. Or I should say relatively inexpensive.
You mean the cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need a fancy cell phone connected, empowered. You could spend a couple $100, but I think you could get a serviceable one for under $50.
Yeah. Bill, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate your call. Scott Craven, our guest today. It's great to have him with us. And if you have a question, I hope you'll join in. The number's 800-642-1234 or email to talk@wpr.org. We are going to take a quick look at the news. We'll find out what else is in store for us here on WPR News, and then we'll be back. I'm Larry Mealer. Great to have you along today on WPR News. Larry Mealer here talking wildlife with Scott Craven. Great to have Scott back. And we have callers online, so I think we should go to the phones and see what's on everybody's mind. Lee in Green Bay, what's on your mind?
Red squirrels. My home sits on 20 acres. About half is wooded. Half of the 20 acres is wooded. I feed birds all year round. I have roughly about 6 gray squirrels because I feed near the house. My red squirrels, I'll have young in the spring and they kind of disappear. And I was wondering if Scott knows would a disease be around that would be primarily affecting the red squirrels? Would it be a predator such as a weasel? I have chipmunks. My chipmunk population seems to be good.
I don't know of anything specific to red squirrels that we could pin that on by way of disease, but you never know. I'm not tuned into that loop as much as I was before retirement, but I don't think that's a likely proposition. If you usually had red squirrels right around the house, or you still have a few, but then they seem to do the vanishing act.
This spring now I had some, but now they've disappeared kind of, and that's been happening pretty much every spring into summer. I don't have them like I used to. I don't hear them chattering down in my lower part of the property where it's a lot of white pine, red pine, and just, a lot of brush.
Yeah. Well, there could be something around that's specifically picking them off. Where is your house? What county?
Green Bay. Lee's in Green Bay.
Yeah. Okay. That's a possibility, some type of a raptor or some type of a mammalian predator, but I think it's more likely that they're just making some normal adjustment in the season so that there's either a food source or something attractive to them such that they're not really dependent on the feeders. And they're off doing something else, and you'll see some again next spring. Now, if overall there are less than there used to be, that's likely a habitat change or potentially some interaction with the gray squirrels. But I guess I have no obvious explanation for you, but I don't think it's something catastrophic. Over the years, we've often had people call with birds at the feeder and say, well, the birds have all disappeared. They must have experienced some horrendous die-off, and that's not usually the case. It's some type of a shift in response to, hey, the neighbor's got a better feeding station or is offering a seed that's more attractive, or natural foods become available and they're no longer as dependent on the feeders. It's more likely an explanation like that than the fact that the squirrels are disappearing. And that's about all I can tell you.
Yeah.
But it's probably not a catastrophic disease.
Lee, there you go. Thank you for calling. Mary in Madison, we'll go to you now. Hi, Mary.
Hi, kind of another squirrel question. We have polywood furniture. It's exterior furniture. Are you familiar with that?
Composite.
Composite furniture. That's getting chewed up by what we think are probably squirrels, just because of where the places where, like the very top of the chairs, and kind of unusual places for a rabbit to be chewing it. But you ever heard of squirrels going after that composite furniture?
I've heard of squirrels going after just about anything at one time or another, from wood, not only squirrels but other rodents going after wood siding, going after furniture items, going after car components. If this composite is pretty hard, resin-like material, whatever's chewing should be leaving some tooth marks in the damaged area, and you should be able to take a look at those. And first of all, what you want to look for is paired indentations or paired tooth marks. In other words, right next to each other in identical size. And what that tells you first and foremost is that it's some type of a rodent. rabbits also have paired incisors, but they're not rodents, and they wouldn't do anything like that. So that would identify a rodent, and then the width of those incisors would identify what rodent it is, whether they're reasonably large or whether they're maybe an eighth of an inch or so, which would suggest the squirrel. And there are actually some online resources or mammal books that would give you those measurements. But that will confirm what's doing the problem or what's doing the damage. And again, this is the third time this has come up today, where if this is happening regularly, or you think there's new tooth marks, every other day or once a week or whatever, then again, placing a trail camera so that it's trained on the furniture would give you photographs of exactly who's doing it and when, and then allowing you to target that. If that's not particularly helpful, if it doesn't really matter, you just want to put an end to it, then the choice is either coating the affected area with something that's going to be repellent to those animals, like the red pepper treatment that we talked about a little earlier with birdseed, or something else that a bird feeding store or whatnot could probably guide you to. Or, again, I don't know what the structure of the furniture is, whether this is like a top piece or a rail or something like that they're after, and then that could be essentially covered. The affected areas could be covered with a little bit of bent sheet metal or heavy gauge wire or whatever, just until the problem has come to an end. You don't want to have it looking badly, but on the other hand, if it's chewed up, it's looking poorly to begin with. So there are a couple of alternatives, but the first thing you need to determine is for sure who's causing the problem. And then again, you can set, if it's squirrel, let's say it is squirrels. So what do? Well, you could treat the material, you could armor plate the material, or you can remove the squirrels. And there are live traps and other tactics that will allow you to do that.
Yeah.
So
it made me think about my lawn. I've got a lawn chairs, 4 lawn chairs, and around a table with a kind of a umbrella-like top you can roll up or roll down. And I had it rolled down and tied up, the cloth, and I went out to put it up one day, and there's a hole in my cloth and when I opened it completely up, a walnut fell out. The squirrel was wanted to hide a nut in my, and it seemed like a good place to the squirrel anyway. Well, now I have a ventilated top. Oh, boy. Mary, thanks for calling. Ruth in Whitewater, your turn. Hi, Ruth.
Well, hi there. I am calling about, I decided to try and grow some blueberry plants in large, like half-barrel containers. And one of them made it through the winter, so I put a couple more in that I just bought this year. And this is going to go all 3 little pigs here. One I saw got dug out, and I did see a squirrel in there. I did not catch it doing it, but guilt by association, just pulled out with the roots, just lying there on top of the dirt. One of them got bitten straight through, so it was separated from the roots. And the other one, I did see a squirrel chewing off one of the good branches that was there. So it seems they have a taste not just for blueberries, but for blueberry wood. And before I spend more money buying more bushes, I'm just looking for wisdom on ways to cohabitate successfully.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a different plant or different material being damaged, but the same principle we've talked about a little bit, and that is that if squirrels are doing some damage, there's 2 alternatives. You either deal with the squirrels directly, okay, we don't want squirrels here, we're going after them, or we're going to try and do something to modify the planting situation so the squirrels can't do the damage. Slightly different solution for the different problems. For example, if something's digging up the pots or plants, you can make a wire covering, put a hardware cloth or a large mesh chicken wire, plant the material through the screening, and then the screening over the rest of the pot prevents anything from doing any digging or burying nuts like the squirrel in Larry's umbrella or whatever. That will take care of that. It may compromise your weeding a little bit and cultivation, but again, we figure out what the lesser of several evils is. The plants themselves could be domed until they get established. And I'll just tell you, just as an aside, I've tried blueberry cultivation in numerous places and numerous times, and those things are really particular about soil acidity and other problems. They're not the easiest things to grow. So I just urge you to dig into that area of things before you invest in a lot more plants or if the squirrels are causing you problems.
Yeah.
So other than the barrier to prevent digging, preventing anything from getting at them at all would require some type of a dome or covering, the way we were talking about earlier with tomatoes. If you want to deal with the squirrels directly, then you can start live trapping them, or, there are other alternatives. If you live in the country, they can be removed by more direct means. But I'll just tell you, the problem there is that there's a nearly endless supply of squirrels. And over the course of many years on with Larry, I always fall back to my good friend, the horticulture specialist at UW many years ago, who did battle with squirrels to protect his fruit trees in his relatively small suburban yard. And he live trapped squirrels 24/7, 365 days a year. And this was an urban area. This was downtown Madison. And he averaged over the years, and he sent me his annual trapping results, he would remove on the average 155 gray squirrels a year. And I know they weren't coming back. So the point being, you can say, oh, there's 2 or 3 squirrels in the yard, and you can remove those squirrels. And 3 days later, there'll be 2 or 3 squirrels in the yard, and they just keep coming. So don't let yourself in for a lot of frustration dealing with the removal effort, because it's very difficult. If you can figure out some way to prevent their access to the plant and double down on that, so whatever the access prevention is serves as a plant support or a plant trellis or whatever, that's probably the best alternative. And good luck.
Good luck, Ruth. Thank you for calling. Scott in Elko, we'll go to you now. Hi, Scott.
How you doing today?
Good. Appreciate the call.
Good.
I have a koi and goldfish pond. It's just a small pond next to my house. And usually every year, a month after the ice goes out, frogs show up. This is the first year in probably 12 years that I do not have a frog. Do you know what the problem is with frogs?
The frog situation was a little odd this year because we started out, especially depending on where you are in the state. In my cabin up north, it was incredibly dry. So the little swampy area that I try and maintain next to the house, because it attracts hundreds of frogs, and we like to hear the chorus, there were no frogs, none, zip. Now in the last couple of weeks, we've had heavy rains, and the frogs have come out in force as if they think it's late April. And I'm hearing frogs that normally would not be singing in end of June, early July, but they are. Whether they're trying another cut at the breeding season, I don't know how successful they'll be, but things are modified by local weather. And if you had a fairly dry spring, which we did both up there and here around my gardening in Madison, there was not a great deal of movement. I too have a backyard water feature, with goldfish in it, and lots of different frogs. Over the years, I've had 7 of the 12 species of Wisconsin frogs have just shown up out of seemingly nowhere to occupy that pond. But that's usually dominated by toads, and I had very few this year, just 1 or 2. I had no spring peepers, 1 or 2 chorus frogs, and I've had nothing particularly unusual. So what you observed is, well, for the sake of the two of us, we'll call it widespread, and I blame it on the weather pattern. But now that we've had decent rains lately, things seem to be returning to normal.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Next year could be entirely different. And the frogs, I'll just tell you that they have an incredible ability to get cross-country from into seemingly places where, how in the heck did that frog get here?
Yeah.
So hold out for better luck next year, but I don't think it's anything catastrophic that's going to persist.
Scott, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Jim in Appleton, we'll go to you. Hi, Jim.
Hello. I have a problem with my milkweed plants. The leaves will develop a little wilt on the edge, and then it gets larger over several days' time. And in a handful of days, the whole leaf will then be wilted, and other leaves on a plant will become involved, and then other plants become involved. This, I've noticed a handful of years, but it's more bothersome the last 2 years, to the point now then the monarch butterflies are avoiding my milkweed plants too. So I wonder if you had some ideas what might be happening there.
Well, the first comment is this although it's related to monarch conservation, which is something I'm interested in, I think it's a horticultural issue, probably related to some type of wilt or fungus, similar to what I've got in the backyard. Now, I had a tremendous crop of peas, edible pod peas, the flat ones and the full ones, and they were looking great. They were 4 feet tall. I started picking. All of a sudden, the plants began to turn brown. Plenty of moisture, just turned brown. It's going from plant to plant. They'll all be dead in a few days. That's usually some sign of a fungal problem or wilt or infection, and that's probably what's affecting the milkweed. I can only tell you there's so many people interested in milkweed these days because of the monarch that if you check with a local nature center or a garden center, say, hey, here's what's going on, or better yet, pull up a sample plant and take it to somebody, I think you'll get your answer.
Jim, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Scott, I know you wanted to remind deer hunters can select free deer permits according to the DNR.
Yes, actually, they just sent out another announcement this morning that for folks who have purchased their deer licenses, or if they're doing it now, to remind them that at the time, early on in the season, the antlerless quotas and permits weren't set. They are now. So you should remember, if you have a deer license for this coming season, go back into the system and select what county or unit you want your free farmland antlerless tags in, so that you don't miss out on that. Yeah. And I'm one of the delinquent many. I buy my license right away in March and then forget about it, and I'm going to have to go in this weekend and figure out where to ask for those free antlerless permits. Mm. So that was just a reminder for folks.
Yeah. Another note here, the proposed cuts to federal fish and wildlife programs, budgets, and staff could impede conservation efforts in Wisconsin. What are the biggest concerns?
Well, there are a number of federal entities in Wisconsin that have not only significant impact here in Wisconsin, but also nationwide. For example, the National Wildlife Health Laboratory here in Madison was founded back in the early 70s and really got cranked up about 75 as a cooperative venture, not just here in Wisconsin with the university and the DNR, but nationwide, and actually some global impacts. Historically, that unit, for example, was the primary data source for the conversion of lead to steel in ammunition. They did the work with the toxicity of lead in wildlife, so a lot of the work that led to the bans we're now seeing. They work cooperatively with state agencies to help control disease outbreaks of all types, but especially with waterfowl. So they do the diagnostics, provide diagnostic support for all federal and state agencies when it comes to these agencies are finding dead animals, like some of the calls people have made today. I think my squirrels are dying off or something's happening. This lab did the necropsies and diagnosis for those kinds of problems. So, and they've been involved more recently in avian influenza surveillance. They were the first ones to diagnose the highly pathological avian influenza in waterfowl, and everybody knows the problems that's causing for us. That's just the health lab. The Cooperative Wildlife Research Unit at UW in Madison, the Cooperative Fisheries Unit at UW Stevens Point, the research lab over in La Crosse, and probably others have all played pretty critical roles in different aspects of fish and wildlife conservation, and they're all kind of under the gun with some of the proposed changes in funding at the federal level. So there's a great deal of uncertainty, but the uncertainty, if any of these facilities are greatly curtailed or lost, there's some pretty serious implications, not just for us in Wisconsin, but people all over the country, and I'm sure other states that have facilities are in the same boat. Anyway, for the kinds of folks who listen to the program and are concerned about conservation issues, the fate of some of those facilities is a big one, and it's yet to be determined, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Oh. Well, Scott, on that note, I want to thank you so much for taking time to be with us once again. We'll be seeing you next month as well, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. I'll be on in August, and then this is just juggling things between Jamie and David and I, and then I'll actually, the September issue conflicted with my son drawing a bear tag after 12 years of waiting. So on that 3rd of September, I'll be chasing bears in northern Wisconsin. So anyway, enjoy the rest of the summer.
Scott, thank you very much for calling. Scott Craven, Emeritus UW Extension Wildlife Ecologist. Always great to have him come by. And we will have him back again next month. Coming up next, we talk to Richard Cates Jr., a southern Wisconsin farmer and author of A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land. That next. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Thanks so much for joining us on WPR News. Larry Mealer here. We're going to turn our attention to a new book that's out that I've liked a lot, and it has to do with the Cates family farm. It's nestled in a valley in Iowa County, included in the Wisconsin Driftless region of our state. It's rich in history, Lowry Creek watershed, and the farm established there is the subject of this book. And it's titled A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land, a farm family's journey toward a land ethic. And it was written by Richard Cates Jr., longtime farmer, co-owner of the Cates family farm. He's the author of the book that we'll be talking about. And I hope you'll join in as we visit with Richard. Are you a farmer? Maybe you grew up on a farm. Do you wonder how farmers view the land and their responsibility to conserve it? Give us a call. The number's 800-642-1234, or you could send an email to talk@wpr.org. Love to hear from you. Richard Cates, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, Larry, thank you so much. You are an honest icon, Wisconsin icon, and I just, it's such a joy to be with you again. You had me on years ago and for a number of different topics, and it's always a joy and a pleasure.
Well,
thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for writing your book. I really enjoyed reading it, and it's kind of a nice history of your family as it farmed for, I think, 5 generations, isn't it? No?
Yeah, I guess you could call our grandchildren our rising fourth. So, in Wisconsin, we go back 5 and, but when I think about the history of our land, it's been peopled by those who've cared for it for more than 10,000 years. So we're kind of newcomers, I guess.
Yeah, and you do get into who came before in the early stages of your book, and I enjoyed reading that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe describe the location of the farm.
Sure. Larry, if I could, I can give a couple sentences of overview, but could I just read a brief piece from my book that puts us right into the Lowry Creek watershed?
That would be perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're in the Driftless area, and that is, for folks who aren't as familiar, the area where there was no glacial activity, in other words, no drift, which is the soil and the stones that the glacier pushes. So it's the hilly and almost mountainous part of southwest Wisconsin. It's quite magical to all of us who live there. And so I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs. I'm going to put you right there where we live. The cold, clear, spring-fed waters of Lowry Creek emerge to greet the light of day from cracks in the limestone and sandstone bedrock laid down by an ancient ocean 500 million years ago, when the North American tectonic plate was part of an enormous landmass known as Laurentia. And at that time, the Driftless area was located in the vast ocean near the Earth's equator, just beginning its long, slow slide to the north. And Larry, it goes into how I'm walking along this water course with my dear granddaughter, Sloan Helen Cates, and how we look down and she sees something moving. I tell her it's probably trout dessert, and she laughs. But what I see are the reflections of all who've walked this valley for the past 10,000 years. We have very strong archaeological evidence in the headwaters of our creek. We now have a site. My neighbor Joe Stapleton had it authorized by the Smithsonian Institute. We've got artifacts or cultural pieces back 10,000 years. And so for that long, people have been using this water course between the Wisconsin River and the high ground. And trout has been gone. The native trout has been gone since unintended European farming consequences from part of a century ago. But now Sloan and I are looking down, and the iconic brook trout is back, and it's really a miracle. It's a gift. It's a joy. It's a result of all the people in my community who have tried to do better on the land, and we've cleaned the water up, and the brook trout have come back. So I'll conclude, this water is the lifeblood of the valley. It is indeed, along with the flesh and blood of my granddaughter, one of Earth's innumerable gifts.
It's very well put. Well, and you talk about the farm. You say our farm runs on sunshine and rain, healthy soil, and good relationships.
Yes. Well, it took a long time. I was a gentleman, a young man raised in the 80s with. We were told, there's only one way to farm. You get big, and you get big as quick as you can. And, we have all these modern miracles to help you with the different for herbicides and pesticides. And I went that direction. I had an 800 head beef operation. The problem is in Wisconsin, that takes a lot of farms. And so I ran on 3 farms, and I wasn't focused on what the opportunity right in front of us as a family was to build community around taking care of that beautiful landscape. And once my dear wife, my best friend, told me that, she made me realize there's another way, a really good way. And she saved the farm, and I often say she saved me from myself. So it was quite a journey.
Ben, it was interesting to me, and I wondered if this had had an impact and caused you to go that earlier way that you went, because you spent time after you received your PhD in soil science. You wound up in Saudi Arabia. That was a most interesting segment of your book. 3 years on a farm in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that up, because I had a most remarkable experience at the Department of Soil Science, University of Wisconsin-Madison, under Drs. Dennis Keeney and Robin Harris. Unfortunately, Robin just passed.
Yeah.
A very sad thing. And other leaders in the Department of Soil Science. But I wanted to work overseas, and I turned out a person I knew quite well from an earliest stage in my training, my soils training, was actually working in the Middle East. They called us up because they knew we wanted to come overseas and said, "Hey, Dick, I'm working on the largest dairy farm in the world. My job is to run a soils and plant lab and raise all the crops to feed 6,000 cows. Would you like to come and take my job, because I'm going to be leaving?" So him and we said, "What?" And within a week we said, "Sure, why not?" And so I spent 3 years. The farm eventually was the largest vertically integrated dairy farm in the world, and my job was to feed 10,000 cows, 28,000 animals daily on feed we grew under irrigation in the Arabian desert. And really, long story short, the way I was able to be successful was because of my soils degree. I saw all the manure that was being wasted, piled up in the desert, and I did trials, and I showed them, look, you're going to reduce your fertilizer costs. You're going to improve the soil if you put this stuff on. And sure enough, in time they did, and it was a success. But we were glad to be there only 3 years. When we came back to our home farm, which was too rough and too hilly and too wet when I was a boy, all of a sudden it looked like Shangri-La. And we never left. That was in 1987.
Oh, a great story. And I thought it was kind of interesting to me. You know, your dad, Dick Cates Sr., he was very respected, nationally respected attorney.
Yeah.
He'd spent time, I think, when he was in law school, working on a farm to raise money to get himself through law school.
Right. Yeah.
And he you know, he bought this farm, and I wondered, I think you even speculate, you wonder if he was buying it for himself, or really to give you all, you know, the family, the chance to live under those kinds of farm conditions, living in the country.
Yes. Well, he was from back in New England. He worked on his uncle's farms in Maine as soon as he was a teenager, and then in college, and then after he got out of the Marines. And he just had farming in his blood, but he wanted to come to Wisconsin because he thought this was the land of milk and honey. This is where the soil is good. The land there's not so many rocks. And he came out here, went to law school, but in the first year, he worked for a family named Bribey out in Dane, Wisconsin, and that way he could transport himself into Madison. But he worked for room and board, not wages. But he worked so hard, and he was such a voracious eater that he has great stories. Mr. and Mrs. Bribey's would sit there at the table and watch him go into his thirds. And then Hans finally said, "Cates, I should have hired you for wages." He was leaving him out of house and home. But he got this farm. This farm was no longer a working farm because he wanted his kids to have some of the background he had, and he wanted us to learn to work. And by God, it did work. We did what he said, and he didn't know what we were doing, but we did what he said, and I'm the one who stuck with it. And it was a great experience.
Well, as you said, initially you kind of wanted to go big. One of the things I like about the book is that, I mean, it's well written, but you also get into the mistakes you made, and
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's really important for people to be able to read something like that. It's not all sugar coated here.
No, and I thank you for noting that. And isn't that the way life is? If we went around and said, "Gee, we made the right choice on the first go round," we probably hadn't been doing many things, because failure is a lot of success. And I always say that imagination, besides passion, imagination is really what will propel us all forward. Is if it doesn't work the first time, figure out a different way to do it. And that was Einstein's thing, is imagination is even more important than knowledge, because you have to figure out, if you've got a bunch of facts, you have to imagine how to put them together. And we did. We had there's a lot of fun stories in this book of trial and error, for sure. Larry, thank you for bringing that up.
Well, yeah, and I noted back when, I forget, at one point your dad bought a chisel plow.
Yeah.
And you didn't like it at first.
No, it was 1976, and hardly anybody did conservation tillage at that time. I was used to soil looking flat and black, and why did they call, when you looked at a field that had stalks in it, they called that trash. Well, that's a bad word to call organic matter that's sitting on your soil to keep it out of the stream, but that's what they called it. And so as a boy who had never used a chisel plow, I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I was trying to bury all that stuff, but that's not what a chisel plow does. Well, thankfully, my neighbor, he was one of Frank Lloyd Wright's proteges, he stopped on over and he says, Dick, it's supposed to look like that. Now you just go park your tractor and rest in the shade and have a good day. That was 1976.
But through that, you became a real proponent of that kind of work.
Yeah, we really did take it to heart. And when I came home from when I came back from freshman year of college, 1971, my dad gave me as a Christmas present Aldo Leopold's book, A Sand County Almanac, and he said, take a look at it, read it, we'll talk about it. I did before I went back to college. Didn't understand a thing. But we spent a lifetime, my father and I, he helping me. We went to see Wendell Berry and Wes Jackson, two of Leopold's disciples, speak at the Shack in the late 70s, early 80s. And I started to get this stuff. And I said, I often say now, Leopold's words have challenged me and nurtured me through my whole life. But the notion of a land ethic, personal care of what we've been given, I call them Earth's gifts, and that's Robin Wall Kimmerer's term, is really what I feel a responsibility to do. And our son and daughter-in-law, Eric and Kylie, who run the farm now, they've added as a tagline on their website and on all of our shirts and hats, a commitment to conservation. So it's in our heart, it's in our blood, and all I want to do is show folks that it's very possible to do that, to keep your soil on the land and not in the water, and your brook trout will come back. And it's a joy. It's a joy to farm and live that way.
Yeah. Richard Cates, Jr., Dick Cates, is the author of A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land, a farm family's journey toward a land ethic. And we'll continue to talk with him. I'm Larry Mealer. You're listening to WPR News. Talking today with Richard Cates about his book, A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land. And you can join in if you have a question or comment, 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. Love to hear from you. I want to go, you tried to go big, and then you turned around and discovered that you could actually have a very good living in other ways. Rotational grazing is something that you got into. Talk about that whole switch.
Oh, you bet, Larry. Yeah, it's multi-pronged. It's not just one thing. But once we realized when we came back to Wisconsin, we watched some other really good farmers implement motion or rotation on their grasslands, and we realized that that's what the bison have done so successfully for thousands of years. Is really that motion. Is nothing's taken down to the grass isn't taken too short. They're not allowed to stand in one wet spot too long. We move them every day. We have portable fence. It's very simple to erect now. So that was part of it. And we continue to get bigger thinking, okay, we got more cattle. We've got a low cost way to do this thing. But that wasn't enough. What Kim really taught me was what we haven't done is the other pieces in the three-legged stool of sustainability. We hadn't built community around what it is we were doing. And she said, you sold a few steers to friends and neighbors and they made you some money. Why don't you do more of it? I said, that's not what a farmer does. You grow stuff. And she said, well, look again at the bottom line. And of course, a few years later, not looking back, I took some credit for the idea. But the notion is that for the first time in my life, rather than taking our livestock to the market and getting the highest bidder, but a very informal exchange, and it was always too low to cover all the expenses and an income, to boot, people would come to the farm and thank us. I mean, there's no going back from that. Thank us for caring for the land, caring for the stream, and for providing good food. And we charge them a very reasonable rate, and it was just a joy. It became the connection, the circle that was closed. I do owe that to my dear wife, but it's the rotational grazing, taking care of the grassland, and it's the relationships with the community that's out there that has to eat every day of their lives. So it's a cool thing.
You have a bur oak tree that stands in the center of your farm, and I kind of like the fact that you mentioned that bur oak tree and kind of talk about it. What's the significance of that tree to you?
Yes. Oh, so many things. So back when they did the original land surveys in the 1820s, that was one of the marker trees. The other two are gone. So it's still there and was used when Americans were first laying out these plots of land. But more significantly, it is a descendant of 8,000 years of a fire-dependent landscape. That landscape, ever since the retreat of the cold Pleistocene, has been a grassland or an oak savanna, more specifically, of grass and trees, that was kept open by fire, first natural fire from lightning, and then the indigenous people kept travel ways and hunting ways open through fire. And those corky bark trees in the white oak family, and that's a bur oak, they was able to withstand the fire. So we had it aged, we had it cored by a DNR employee who happened to be the great-grandson of Aldo Leopold. His name is Jed Mounier, and he lives in Madison. And we found it to be about 240 years old. All the other oak trees of that age are gone in our area because they were in the way of farming, and that was close enough to the stream that they left it. And so not only has it informed us of that long history of grassland and people moving up and down that valley from the Wisconsin River to the uplands where they spent winters hunting, but it also is the beauty, the shade, the elegance, and we look at it every day and we see it out our window. People get married under it. It's just a gift.
Yeah, it is. And before the valley was formed, as you say, it was a grassy kind of oak savanna. And you've actually tried to bring back at least a portion of that oak savanna on your own farm.
We did. Not only where we graze, where we've stayed with the grasses that want to come based on our rotational grazing, and those happen to be mostly cool season grasses. We all know the names: brome grass, quackgrass, fescue, bluegrass. But there's another spot up on the ridge that was never grazed so hard, and we had an ecologist and our forester walk that with us in early 2000. They said, "Oh my, the forbs that were here on the landscape are still here. They're just recessed. And if you open this landscape up, bring some light in, so remove some of the top growth, remove some of the stems, and bring back fire, you'll get these, not just these grasses that were from our prairie ecosystem, but these forbs." And we spent 20 years doing that. We've burned it 9 times. We've removed shrub with fire and axe, and it's just been a joy taking people up there where our son and his beautiful wife, Kylie, got married in 2015. It's as much a part of the farm as the working landscapes down below. And in fact, our little young son, my parents, Kim's parents, their ashes are all remaining on that hill in the restored oak savanna. It's a very beautiful and moving place.
It is indeed. And there's an email from Mark to ask, what is your wish for the future? What do you wish for your great-grandkids?
Yes. I have several wishes, but one is that as a culture, we embrace the notion of a land ethic. And really that means care for the soil, the water, plants, and animals that are in place that we are responsible for. It's no different than having an ethic of care for each other. We wouldn't walk into a public space and cut off someone's arm. When you're farming and you let soil go down into the river or the creek, that's essentially what you're doing. You're taking the lifeblood of that soil, of that landscape, and removing it. You're sending it somewhere else. I would hope that we have matured in the notion of a land ethic. That's one thing. The other thing is that I hope, although our food system we have in place now isn't going to go away, it's very effective at feeding many folks across the planet. But as people become more in tune with protecting their ecosystem, I would hope that there's more and more places for young farmers who have these ethics and are supported by people who want the kind of land protection and the food choices that they provide. So those are some of my dreams.
Yeah, I think they're great dreams. And here you are. You've been in that for so long in your family. And most of the farms in that area just weren't able to kind of succeed.
Exactly. When you get on a marginal landscape, and I use the term marginal based on the fact that I'm from an agricultural perspective, farmers leave and they go to better land if they can afford it, or they just stop. And so the land has been purchased by very well-meaning, good folks who have the money to buy land and take care of it in some really nice ways, and growing prairie, and which is very beneficial to birds and bees, and it's just so valuable. But in terms of raising food, many farmers have gone to areas where that's a little easier. But for us, developing that connection with community has made all the difference. It's just been such a rich journey.
I tell you that it is a rich journey, and your book, I really enjoyed reading your book, Dick. And
oh, thank you, Larry. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry we're out of time. There is so much more we haven't covered in this book. Richard Cates Jr., Dick Cates Jr., his book, A Creek Runs Through This Driftless Land, a farm family's journey toward a land ethic. I hope you have a chance to take a look at it. It's a wonderful, interesting read. And I want to thank you so much for listening, and thanks to our crew, Lee Rayburn, Jeff Robbins, Joe Patnod, Clara Neipert, and our executive producers, of course, Jill Nadeau. I'm Larry Mealer, And stay with us. Lots more in stir here on WPR.